We are live. Welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Let me know in the chat where you're at. We are global. It is evening here where I'm at in Canada. And so I welcome everybody to the stream. We are about to jump into another amazing talk with a brilliant professor. And we're going to talk about the blockchain and business models around the blockchain. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Kim a few questions so you can get to know him a little bit better, and then we're going to jump into a talk with him. So, welcome, Professor Kim. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Awesome, awesome. So, I'm super interested. When did you first start studying blockchain?
Okay, so what happened was that in 2015, so back then, Bitcoin was about $300. I had a graduate student who eventually went on to co-found the blockchain lab with me, and he was doing a project on text parsing, and he just happened to use Bitcoin Twitter feeds and BT and chat relays. And so he would try to explain blockchain to me, and I didn't quite get it. But then what happened is at the end of 2015, I saw an article from Goldman Sachs saying that blockchain was going to be one of the top 10 technologies for next year. Then I took attention. So starting 2016, we formed a blockchain lab, and I started learning about blockchain from bottom up. So I started going to the meetups, Alan Wunsch's meetups in 2016, which had some really good, interesting people. So I got in early, and I got in early through my through the postdoc and the co-founder of the lab, Merrick Laskowski.
Awesome. Super, super cool. So another OG. We've been having some really some folks that have come in the early space, early years of Bitcoin, and it's always great to get the perspective of these OG folks. Okay, so for the folks that are tuning in live, I'd like to draw your attention quickly down below the screen. There's an Ask a Question button. So I'm going to pass over the screen soon to Professor Kim. But while he's talking, if you have any questions, please go ahead and use the Ask a Question button. And then I will make sure that it gets called out while we're live and Professor Kim can answer. There'll also be a Q&A section towards the end. And of course, if you guys want to chat it up in the side panel, please go ahead and create some chatter there. Okay, so without further delay, we are going to introduce Professor Kim in earnest. As one of the leading blockchain scholars in Canada, Professor Kim is engaged in blockchain research projects with the UN, Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, as well as the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, and the Aion Network, which is a Canadian-based blockchain company. He is in the faculty for Don Tapscott's Blockchain Research Institute. He's co-organizer of U of T's Fields Institute seminar series on blockchain and an advisor to the Government of Canada's white paper on blockchain and digital ledger technologies. That was a bit of a tongue twister, but I think I got through it all right. I'd like everyone to give a nice digital round of applause for Professor Kim as he takes over the stream and gives us an amazing talk on blockchain business models. Thank you, Professor Kim, for being here, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Jared, and thank you for the invitation. These are actually what I've shown you here are some of the other collaborators that Jared has talked about. Many of them.
Sorry, you have to share your screen.
Oh, is it not? Oh, I thought it's shared. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry about that.
No
Let's
worries.
see. Okay. I'm assuming that it's sharing. Okay, I think it is. I can see everybody. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Um, so, so these are some of the other organizations that I'm collaborating with. Lately, I've done some work with Climate Check. I just finished a project with Climate Check, and that's actually quite interesting. That's on using blockchain for carbon mitigation. Climate Check is a company in the climate space, climate science space, so I find that really interesting. And that's an Ottawa-based company. Another one, Grain Discovery, which is actually a Toronto-based agriculture startup, and that's using blockchain for both traceability for tracing things like grains and quality of the grains, but also facilitating a marketplace where grain elevators and producers, grain elevators and buyers of grain could actually source from farmers. So the focus, and my focus even from the get-go, has always been on enterprise business applications. And in fact, I've never really owned, stupidly, that much cryptocurrency ever. So, but because my focus has always been on, how can you use blockchain for what we teach in the business school, which is where I'm part of, for enterprise uses. So a lot of the focus of this is on true business models, so models that would actually work within an enterprise setting. Although I will speak to applications outside of cryptocurrencies or other types of more novel applications. But for the most part, I generally focus on sort of the enterprise applications. And because of that, I may say some things that possibly many of you will consider controversial, but we can possibly have a discussion about that. Okay. So, this is a slide that I show many other people that are new to blockchain, because most people, again, more likely not you folks, but many people that they have a difficult time separating blockchain for Bitcoin. And especially when I talk to an enterprise audience, when I talk to my business audience, people that I consult with, or my business school professors, or my dean, or the people that I meet in business, I make sure to just clarify very quickly the difference between blockchain as the enabling technology and Bitcoin as an application. So even if they don't believe in Bitcoin or understand Bitcoin, that I go on and tell them that as of now, we have blockchain applications in companies as established as Walmart and Amazon and JP Morgan and Cargill and all these other enterprises. And that actually, I think, is a good way to lead off, because it really convinces people that there's a place for blockchain in the enterprise setting. And that, to me, as a business school professor, with a focus on enterprise use of blockchain, it's important that I establish that link. So one, a use case that I think is actually quite important to mention is the use case for food safety. So we know that Walmart is tapping blockchain for a more transparent, authentic, and trustworthy global food supply chain. So I'm assuming if you're here, many of you know about this use case and may have heard about Walmart's collaboration with IBM on something called Food Trust, where Walmart and other suppliers of Walmart and many other grocers and retailers put in information like the authentication information about the fish they catch, or the grains or the meat that go into ultimately package and ultimately is received by the retailer like Walmart. So doing this, the idea is use blockchain for food safety. That is, that use the power of the blockchain to track products from farm to fork. If you can do that, then safety issues can be identified and traced immediately, as opposed to the months it sometimes takes when there's an outbreak or salmonella outbreak, for instance, to find out the actual source. And that has, not only do people get sick while this is occurring, but actually has huge implications for the producers, because if you can't isolate a specific farm, then you might have to do what happened in England in Mad Cow, which is in England, all the cows in the 90s were killed because they couldn't granularly identify the source of the outbreak for mad cows. Another application is secure keys application called verified.me. So, and this is an article from Bloomberg from last year, and it says that Canada is making a big leap in modernizing identity verification, tapping blockchain technology to let consumers digitally prove who they are to securely access banking and other personal services. So again, this is really big because this is saying, and I've caught videos and I've chatted with the people there. And this is really interesting. They call this SecuredKey, which is a company that's sponsoring the Verified Me service, says that what this is actually, this is a triple blind identity verification service. That is to say that you don't have, you as the holder of the identity, you're one party. Banks or other financial services that you want to work with constitute the second party, and SecuredKey as the infrastructure provider constitutes the third party. And the idea is that this is called triple blind. Not one party needs to knows any more information than it needs to be able to securely perform a transaction. So for instance, I don't need to give all my banking information to the Bank of Canada for me to be able to log on and access my tax records. But oftentimes in previous situations, you kind of had to put in a lot of information. They had to provide the Bank of Canada a lot of information just to be able to secure that logon. The idea of SecuredKey is I only provide to the Bank of Canada or to the Revenue Canada just absolute minimum amount of information that's needed for me to access their accounts and for them to verify their accounts through my bank, my CIBC. So every little party actually has access to only the bare minimum information that's needed for the transaction to occur, and yet, but at the same time, I own and possess, and I dictate who gets what information. So, Verified Me calls this triple blind, but the amazing value for this is that this transaction occurs again, really without one intermediary actually needing to possess too much information about myself. And third one, which I don't know if many of you probably know, is that Canada, Toronto area, but mainly Canada and Ontario specifically, we're really a leader in both AI and blockchain. Those two are often mentioned as sort of the two leading technologies going forward. What I can tell you is that Canada, by virtue of the fact that the grandfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, is a professor at the University of Toronto. So Canada is one of the top 5 places for AI, and as the place where Vitalik's from, and as a place where Don Tapscott sort of acted as the Pied Piper to management, and as so much development and work goes on here, and as the place where we have the world famous Fields Institute that sponsors both AI and lecture series on blockchain. So the bottom line here is that Canada is, in Toronto area, the Ontario area, is top 5 for both AI, top 5 in the world for both AI and blockchain. And we have to make sure that we do things like these. And like someone always said that it was the OG. So we have to make sure that we keep fresh, we get new people involved, but at the same time, so stay true to our roots and stay true and keep our area in AI and blockchain prominent. So that was just sort of a preamble for telling you about, telling people anyway, about the enterprise uses of blockchain. So now actually what I want to do is step back and be very circumspect, very straightforward, and be original. Just sit back and cut through all the clutter, and think about blockchain from this perspective. So I'll go to first principles. So maybe not from a management perspective, not first principles in terms of consensus mechanisms. I'm not going to and technical things. I'm not really going to do that. What I want to do is specifically sit back and say, what is blockchain? And this diagram shows you that throughout history, we've had to have different means of maintaining a ledger. A ledger just says who owns what and how much. And if I owe you money, it keeps track of that. So this clearly, everyone's accustomed to ledgers. And in the olden days, they used to keep ledgers on clay tablets, on papyrus, tally sticks. When it got sophisticated and when really just finance became much more transparent and easy for people to do, and much more sort of comforting for people to transact, was when people adopted double entry bookkeeping. And from there, the innovation was the use of spreadsheets. The next innovation, we argue, is that of distributed ledgers. And simply put, this says that rather than having each company maintain their own ledger, and not necessarily having consistency between one ledger and the ledger of the company that they bought from or they sold to, the idea of distributed ledgers is that the ledgers are visible to all in a network, and they are synchronized to all within the network. And the idea then, the powerful concept from that is that if all in a network who transact and do commerce together have access to a common ledger, then what used to be done by an intermediary, right? I don't know you if you're good for. I don't know if I should do commerce with you because I don't know if you have good credit. I've never dealt with you before, so because I don't really trust you, because I don't know you, I'm going to use a trusted intermediary. That would be a financial institution like a bank, and we're going to work through a bank. They're going to extend credit to you, or they're going to tell you that I'm good for the money that I promised I would give you, I have. And they're going to sit in the middle, and because we deal with them and because they're a large trusted intermediary, I might not trust you, but I trust the bank, and you might not trust me, but you trust the bank, and they'll sit in the middle and they'll be able to sort of grease the wheels for commerce for us by extending credit or verifying that I have the funds that I claim to have. If in that world, everyone used a distributed ledger where I could actually see exactly how much money you have or how much of the goods you said you claim to have, and I can see if you have that or not, then I don't need that intermediary. Then I could just deal directly with you, because the things that I need to make sure that I have trust in doing commerce with you, I could see in that ledger, and you could see in turn in that ledger. Okay, so that's the idea of a distributed ledger. Why do you do that? Because sometimes the intermediaries that we trust to do things aren't necessarily giving me what I want. Okay, and that actually sort of starts at the root of what I will sort of present several of these blockchain business models. So I'm going to start with first principles, and I'm going to talk about these blockchain business models and principles. So the first one, and I say these because this is sort of coming from experience, having spoken to literally hundreds of people on blockchain and having people come up to me and ask me all the time about their ideas and pitching ideas and talking to my students, explaining to my students. So what I harken back to is what I presented earlier, which is that blockchain is a distributed ledger. I mean, properly, blockchain is database, is a specific way of implementing data, but ultimately the reason you do that, the reason you actually use a blockchain as your database for storing information is this. There's only two reasons why two classes of reasons that one should use a blockchain. One, you aren't happy with the middleman. Okay, so that's great. You know, I love the fact that Visa extends credit for me, and I love the fact that they provide protection for me and they provide protection for the vendors that I buy from. And sometimes if I buy from a vendor and they sell me crap, then Visa will mediate for me and will give me my money back if the vendor won't. So and then also the Visa allows me to buy for some things even if I don't have that money on the account. That's great. The problem with Visa is that they charge 19.5% interest in an environment where my bank, the interest that I get on a bank account is 0.5%. Or when my mortgage is 2.5%. So it's extremely extractive. I mean, the services they offer, is it worth me having to pay 19.5% on interest on the balance that I have with the credit card? And the answer I would argue with you is no. So in that case, I'm not happy with the middleman. In which case, it's worth considering. Is there a way to not have to deal with the middleman? Is there a way to use blockchain technologies and create a distributed ledger so that I don't necessarily need to use Visa as a credit card company? The Starbucks coffee that you might pay $4 for, $0.015 of that is so of the $4 you spend for Starbucks coffee, maybe $0.015, 2 cents, goes to the Kenyan farmer that farmed the coffee. And that's not because Starbucks takes a good chunk of that. They do, but that's not the reason why. The extractive intermediary, so the government, sort of semi-government official to whom the Kenyan farmer is generally obligated to sell his or her coffee to, that's the extractive intermediary that sort of takes off and costs the farmer a lot of money. So they sit in the middle and they siphon off the value, and they leave very little for the Kenyan farmer. So that, you would say, is an extractive intermediary. So in general, what I would say is that there are many instances where the intermediary, the middleman, is expensive, as is the case with Visa, is extractive, as is the case with government officials in Kenya, as many people might argue, and many government functions, or is inefficient. So you consider blockchain when you could look at it, when you could identify an intermediary and say that there's something that I'm not happy with the intermediary, that's extractive, it's exploitative, it's expensive, and it's inefficient. Those are cases when you consider blockchain. Number two, and when I mentioned the thing about Walmart and food traceability, this is true. There are situations when you wish that an intermediary existed, but it does not. There is not in the food supply chain of the world, there is no international or national body that sits there and actually tracks the flow of goods, right? Now, Walmart does to some extent because they're huge and they're 800-pound gorilla, but they've never really done that much to it. So even a company like Walmart doesn't fulfill that role of sitting in the middle and saying, I'm going to track the movement of flow of goods, and I'm going to try to make sure that it's good. I'm going to keep track of the provenance of it, and I'm going to sit in the middle and ensure that when fish is caught in Vietnam, that's actually caught in Vietnam and not in international waters. As it is in nearly most industries, I can't really think of too many, in fact, that it actually does hold, there is no intermediary that sits in the middle and acts as the traceability sort of overlord. So when such intermediary you wish existed, but does not, so when you have a context when intermediary, you wish it had an intermediary, but it does not, that's also a scenario, context in which you should consider a blockchain use case. So this is my principle number one, okay? And it has to do with, so when people ask me about blockchain business models, if they can't tell me an intermediary that they're not happy with, or if they can't describe a context in which they wish there was an intermediary, but there isn't, if you can't do one of those two things, then it's not likely a candidate for applying a blockchain to it. My second principle, who will pay for the blockchain and why? So I hear lots and lots of people with great ideas. And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself a very simple question. One, the blockchain has to be built. Number one, that costs money. And number two, whatever existing system is in place needs to be overhauled for the blockchain to be put in place. So there's there's a pain point, right? So some people will lose jobs, or some people jobs will change. At the end of the day, you could quantify this. You have to go from the status quo to something that uses a blockchain, and it both costs both money in terms of actual money. There's opportunity cost, and there's resistance, and there's inertia. There's money to be paid, and there's pain to be had. And so at the end of the day, you have to say, someone has to make a decision and say, is it worth it? Right? Now, what I've done is I've simplified general business models and said, when you put in a digital transformation, when you make change, when you put in some digital transformation into a business ecosystem, there's sort of three classes of reasons for doing this, and one more important than the other. The most important thing, if you want to sort of justify an IT expenditure to a company, you say, it's going to lead to revenue generation. Will it make me money? So if there's a return on investment, if it costs $1 million to do this, but in 2 years, the company will make $3 million off of it, yeah, they'll invest in that. Right? So you have to ask yourself, does the blockchain model that I have, is it going to make some company money? Because if it does, then they'll pay for it. Number two, so if it doesn't sort of generate revenue, another thing where companies will actually be incentivized to adopt a blockchain solution is if it leads to cost and or time saving. So will it save me, the company, time and or money? If you can prove that it does, then the company might be interested in adopting blockchain. And the third one, and it's sort of not as obvious, is what I call risk mitigation. So does it insure me against something? So when I talk about food traceability, it's actually a risk mitigation. I think people could sort of argue differently, but most obviously it's risk mitigation. What does that mean? That means Walmart, if there's if lots of people are using food trust, and more you'll be able to figure out, where the food that you're about to buy comes from. It makes you feel good, and some people might think you might pay a little bit extra for that. But really, that's not why Walmart's doing that. Walmart isn't putting that in so they'll be able to make more money, and that's not true. There's some cost savings to be had, but believe it or not, it's actually not huge. What is Walmart doing? Risk mitigation. Okay, so if it saves them, if you do that well, it saves them a huge lawsuit down the road. It saves them from being singled out for bad food practices or bad, and it actually. Serves as a relevant, useful piece of insurance. And for that, Walmart is willing to pay money to install a large sort of food traceability supply chain around the world, food traceability blockchain around the world for that. So bottom line here is, but this revenue generation is generally more important for companies than cost and time savings, which again is generally more important for companies than risk mitigation. To the extent that you can actually justify, if you can show that adopting a blockchain solution generates revenue, you have a really good opportunity for your business model to succeed. If you could show that it saves time and cost, that still could be compelling. Minimally, you have to show that it insures the company against something. If you can't do any of these three, then you have to ask yourself, well, why would someone bring you in paid for that blockchain? Third one, and let me try to explain, is what blockchain are you selling? So, again, hundreds of different ideas that I've heard, and lots of people ask me. So what I would actually differentiate, and it's actually is this, and people have actually, one of the really prominent research labs is at University College London, and they wrote a really good article last year talking about different sort of use cases of blockchain. So they classified it kind of in a funny way, and they called it, they've differentiated three different ways, and I'm going to explain. First is blockchain as an IT. So that is blockchain as a legitimate use of information systems, a legitimate use case that again generates revenue or leads to cost savings or leads to risk mitigation. The other thing they've said is blockchain as a meme. And what they meant by that is that this is a use case that is, so actually what they were doing is they're classifying different use cases. So they said a lot of blockchain, so the most prominent use of blockchain is as a legitimate information technology expenditure. The second type of use case is what they said was blockchain as a meme. That is to say that it doesn't technically really need to be blockchain. By some of those definitions that I said about are you replacing intermediary, are you putting in technology to fulfill the need of an intermediary you wish it existed. So maybe doing that to some extent, but for the most part, almost as a meme that is with a message that's complementary to digital transformation, where basically you're being able to sell a story. And because blockchain is popular, because it's on people's lips, because the people have thought about it, because Bitcoin is popular, that it catches the ear of the decision maker, and they said that's called blockchain as a meme. And the third case of blockchains, use cases that they thought about, were just what they call blockchain as magic. And the picture here I've shown you isn't magic, this is bullshit. So this is blockchain as magic, blockchain as performance, blockchain as theater, blockchain as bullshit. And a lot of use cases I see are like that, and a lot of the academics even white papers that I have to review fits in that category. Basically, it's the litmus test for this, and this goes with blockchain, but if you ever read anything about AI, if you are reading something and you think it's just like too pie in the sky, dreamy, then wherever you see the term blockchain, replace that with magic and see how that sentence sounds. And if it sounds just perfectly fine, then you're looking at a use case which is blockchain is magic, which is bullshit. Okay. Another sort of principle is what I would say, again, just thinking about different use cases, is I actually, from an article that I read by Gideon, 2016, I think all blockchain use cases, enterprise, permissionless, permissioned, anything that you could possibly use a blockchain for, can be classified in one of these two. And if you can't classify in one of these two, then I don't think that's actually a legitimate use of blockchain. And one is to, remember I said it's a distributed ledger. So like what a ledger does, it records a transfer of value. So for example, tokenization what tokenization does is it actually records a more intangible transfer of value or a more intangible asset and tokenizes it and quantifies it. And blockchain, in concert with maybe smart contracts technology, makes sure that legitimacy of the quantification, the fact that you got a token, that you have a Stradivarius violin and you've tokenized it into 100 different units that people share. Blockchain, in concert with smart contracts, makes sure that tokenization actually works, and that ownership, the fractional ownership, for instance, works. Blockchain ensures that cryptocurrencies can be properly recorded, that you could actually have a swap of a new cryptocurrency for a more prominent one, that if you do an ICO, that's maintained. You see a lot of different use cases for blockchain for trading markets, again, because fundamentally we're talking about assets and recording of those assets, and blockchain, especially say for instance with Ethereum and the ERC tokens, is really, really good at faithfully recording that transfer of value and making sure that it's immutable and that people can't tamper with that. Second thing blockchain is good at is for tracking that transfer of value. So once a transfer of value has been recorded once, now that may change over time. So when you think about traceability, the thing that's valuable gets produced or farmed or manufactured, and then it gets transformed, it gets moved along the way. Digital ledger technologies and blockchain is really good at making sure that when that thing of value gets changed, or the value of it gets slightly changed, or it moves locations, that as it changes locations, as it changes value, that is consistently tracked immutably and transparently. So for example, food or materials traceability. So any use case that you could think of, again, this could still, it could be cryptocurrencies, it could be anything, or it could be an enterprise use. You have to be able to tell me whether it's a recording transfer value, or whether it's tracking, or whether it's both. But if you cannot say it's one of these two, then I would say to you that it's not a valid use case for a blockchain. This is, I think, this is maybe my last slide. Now, I'm actually leaving plenty of time for you to sort of ask questions. I didn't get into, I could get into lots of different examples, but what I sort of distilled here is my sense of my FAQ of what constitutes a legitimate blockchain business model. And I've sort of given you about 4 principles, sort of effectively litmus tests, right, of what's a legitimate business model. And I think I would say 3/4 of ideas that I've heard do not pass this litmus test. They're just bullshit ideas. Right? So I think many of you out there are probably, there's about 20 of you out there, many of you probably consider yourselves, I'm assuming, entrepreneurs. So let me sort of ask you, I think one of the questions I'd like to ask you is this, which is, as an entrepreneur, what do you really truly believe in? I have time for entrepreneurs or people out there that I consider to be doing it the right way. Right? And what I mean by that is they have thought things through, and they have passed the litmus tests that I presented to you before, these blockchain business model principles. And they're willing to do the hard work. So if they're not very technical, they've taken at least a course on blockchain fundamentals. They've even gone and tried to take some technical courses, but they made an effort. Right? So if I see some, I will, I like to look at people's LinkedIn profiles, and I want to see, even if they come from something, have they tried? Have they gone to meetups? Have they taken certification courses? Have they done Udemy? Have they done something, right? Even things you could do in Toronto, where they've actually tried to at least get their hands dirty, right? It's hard if you're not a technical person, but are they doing it the right way, right? Have they sort of earned their chops? I think entrepreneurs should always start from that, right? So it's easiest if you are a technical person. It's easiest if you sort of done hackathons and you've sort of gone that way, but it's not the only way as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you might have technical expertise, but you may not have access to capital. These folks that are sort of may have access to capital, but they may not have any technical expertise. Either way, I can look at the process you're going through to be an entrepreneur, and I can probably suss out whether you're doing it the right way or not, or trying to cut corners. I have all the time in the world for people that are doing it the right way. Now, even if you do it the right way, you might get to a point where what I call pivot. And that's okay, because I think entrepreneur, you have to sort of, you have to toe the line, and then anyone that's actually done some entrepreneurial work, you know what I mean by pivot. You're constantly having to pivot. Okay. So what I would say to you is that's okay if you're an entrepreneur and you're sort of in pivot mode. I can tell you, for instance, that as an aside, that so at the business school, I lead a lot of. I'm involved as part of my job as a professor. Is I have to advise these different sort of large strategy projects where our MBAs go and work with different companies. And these days, a lot of times they're working with companies that are AI startups. I'd say more than half the time, I will look at the startup and I'd say, that's not AI. Right? They use, remember I talked about blockchain as a meme? That's AI as a meme. Because AI catches people's eyes, because AI catches years of investors, they use the term AI. And at some point, they're probably in pivot mode. At some point, maybe they may have had a legitimate use of AI, but now they're pivoting because they're investors and the market is telling them something differently. That's okay. That's what an entrepreneur is supposed to do. But what I appreciate is someone that understands that they're in pivot mode, as opposed to trying to say that this is something. I just like people to be honest, right? And if you're in pivot mode, that's okay. And as an entrepreneur, what do you really believe in? I think, especially in blockchain, I'd say, I tell people, I might get some pushback. I'd say 90% of cryptocurrencies is a scam. Now, maybe I'm not saying anything controversial at all. So I think there are a lot of people that are considered calling themselves blockchain entrepreneurs that what they really believe in is the greater fool theory. I don't know if you know, the greater fool theory is in economics, is something that says it doesn't matter how good your product is, how bad your product is, or how bad a stock is, as long as there's someone else you could sell that piece of stock for more money. These days with COVID and all this, I don't know if you've heard in the news about all these people using Robinhood and all these different people actually investing. There have been instances where worthless companies have been stocks for worthless companies have been valued up because people believe in greater fool. They'll buy for $1. They'll buy Hertz, which is a bankrupt company, for $3 a share because they think someone else will buy it for $4, even though fundamentally in the long run it actually should be $0. So that's a greater fool. So I think there have been a lot of those people chasing ICOs, entrepreneurs whose only belief was in the greater fool theory, and I think there still are. There's probably less, right? I have sort of ideas about that if people want to ask me about that. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of people out there whose idea is the greater fool theory, which actually, you know what, call a spade a spade. If that's what you believe in, that's what you believe in. And many entrepreneurs believe in the greater fool theory. Anyway, I think I actually forgot to put in a couple more slides, but I'm just gonna end here and field questions actually. Okay, so
Awesome. Sorry, I just needed a second to get my mic back on. Cool. So I'm gonna close down the screen share and just bring us two back up here. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Kim. I liked the litmus test that you gave us. If it doesn't fall into, if you're not tracking value or you're not transmitting value, then what are you doing? It's bullshit, like you said. So that's very, very important to remember for all the folks out there that are building businesses today during our hackathon. We will smell it. We're going to use the Professor Kim's litmus test on your project when you're presenting, and if it doesn't fit into those boxes, watch out.
Well, actually, the two things that I want to mention, and I don't have a slide for it, but I was thinking about this after. There are two additional things that I want you, as an entrepreneur, you should consider. Number one, most of you probably heard of network effects, right? Categorically, if you have a business model that requires network effects, especially if it's a two-sided network, where you have to match buyers and sellers, very likely it's a shitty model. Because, everyone here is, again, I talk about this all the time in my class. We'll talk about, Google and Apple and Microsoft and Facebook. But everyone talks about that. You know why? Because network effects lead to something called winner take all. The world doesn't need 15,000 social networks. They only probably need, and what the world has, or the English-speaking world has, is two: LinkedIn and Facebook, because we don't need any more, right? And so if you have a business model that requires network effects to be successful, you are swimming uphill because you have to get so many people. I mean, if you get it, that's great. Like Bitcoin, that's great. Ethereum, that's great. But most people never reach the network effects. So if you require network effects for you to be successful, that's a tough sell, number one. Number two, what I tell people all the time is who's going to buy you out? So even from the get-go, whenever you're doing something, have an idea who's going to buy you out. Let me tell you a story that's completely different from Bitcoin. So if you're Canadian, you've heard of a story. I don't know if you're Jaron. Are you Canadian, Jaron?
I'm yeah.
So you've probably heard of Zellers. Remember Zellers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Zellers was actually a retailer that wasn't doing well. It was kind of, sort of on the brink of bankruptcy. And all of a sudden, Zellers went around and painted all their stores red and white, right? Why in God's name would a company who's just go around paint their stores? You know why? Because Target was coming to Canada, and Zellers wanted to make sure when Target people came in, managers came in and walked around Zellers, that it looked like Target, right? So the moral of that story, especially for anybody in technology, your holy grail, your legitimate holy grail, I suppose an ICO could be a holy grail too, but really you're sort of this traditional holy grail for a technology company is to be bought out. And if the earlier you know who might possibly buy you out, the better off you are. So always remember that Zeller story and always have an idea of who would buy you out.
Wow, that's great advice there. Okay, so we do have some questions from the audience.
Sure.
And I see this one's been upvoted, so I'm going to ask this one first. So many entrepreneurs and investors are sold on the hype or unmature technology. Do you have any suggestions on how to ground out those folks, I guess, those ideas, and cut through the hype without making people's eyes glaze over?
Cut through the hype. Okay. So
I think that
I'm not quite sure why their eyes would. You mean cut through? You mean. I guess what I'm hearing is that sometimes when you try to cut through the hype, you go into the technicalities, and that's when people's eyes glaze over. Right?
I think potentially that's what they mean.
Yeah. So what I would probably go with is that the guideline I had about, does it make money? Does it save money? Does it provide insurance? Okay. Yeah. So clearly say you want to use one of those three terms and sort of make it clear. That's what I mean.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great. Okay, here's another question. What is your opinion on IBM? IBM blockchain as a service. So, yeah, that's a different kind of business model around blockchain. I guess it's a different type of value as well, right?
Um, Let me just think. Blockchain. It's not just IBM. I think Amazon has it as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think um, that as a service model makes a hell of a lot of sense if blockchain. I think you have to have more penetration, where you have to have more people, where blockchain, more and more people are using blockchain to the extent that they could actually go and use an infrastructure play. I just don't think we're at a level where there's such wider adoption of blockchain where people are saying, oh, should I go use Amazon's blockchain as a service? Should I go use IBM's blockchain as a service? The demand just isn't there. So right now, I think it's more proprietary, right? I'd love to be in a world where we can actually use these as a service, but right now we're just not there yet, right? Having said that, I think a decent business model is if you think that is where the future is going to go, provide something that actually greases the wheel for that. As an aside, I'm just telling you that I just sat in on Perry and Boring and the Digital Center for Digital Commerce. Word escapes me. But anyway, there was a big talk today on central bank digital currencies. And the Bank of Canada was there, and someone from Hungary, Singapore, like 10 central bankers were there, and they're talking about potential uses of CBDCs, also with stablecoins. And actually, interestingly, they not only did they talk about central bank digital currencies, but they saw it complement to stablecoins. And someone from Stellar was there, and someone from Maker was there. So I think that's something where you go, okay, if you look at that and you go, okay, if all these people are right, and if central bank digital currencies become big, and if there's a place for stable coins, and possibly if there's a place for Libra, then is there an infrastructure play for me, right? So I took a little bit away from the as a service. What I'm saying is that I'm sort of agnostic whether it's good or it's bad. It's just simply that I just don't think we have adoption enough where we need as a service infrastructure players that much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right. So yeah, we still got some more questions being added. So
Sure.
if you got a question for Professor Kim, drop it down in the ask a question spot. I'm gonna keep reading them off for you. So here's another one. Where do you factor in crypto economics, so incentives versus disincentives, as part of the blockchain business design?
Yeah, it's interesting. We wrote a paper on that too. I think, and I'll be perfectly honest, I think with uh, token economics, cryptocurrencies, so there aren't too many that I'm convinced where, because, you pay for a token, right? Um, because you believe that the value of that token will appreciate in value. So you're willing to pay a certain amount for, I actually had EOS coins, right? Because if EOS really built out its infrastructure, then those coins would actually appreciate in value, would actually economically have an economic value, right? And so what you're doing is you're buying a coin for its future economic value. I don't think EOS realized that. Maybe it will, but I got rid of my EOS coins. So I think the thinking is that in very rare instances, would you actually really truly have a token that actually realizes its economic value? And it goes back to network effects. And in fact, in order to really do that, you need to have network effects. Either network effects, so that the market determines that your token has value, or somehow you get usually government intervention so that you're told that you have to use that token of value. So I don't have the opportunity to have a back and forth with the person that asked the question, but I think that's fundamentally the difficulty with token economics is that the token that you're buying, like if you if, in order for token economics to work, and Bitcoin works, but in many of the models that I've seen, you have to believe that that token will appreciate in value. And I just think in most instances, it just will not appreciate in value because it will never reach that network effect.
Awesome. I'm putting a message in the chat. Perhaps the person who asked the question would like to come on and have a chat with you. We'll see if they respond. But there is another question here, and that goes out to anybody as well. If you want to come on the cast with us and have a bit of a conversation, just put your hand up in the chat and I'll invite you onto the cast. You don't have to come on camera. We can just have your voice if you like. So that's open to anyone that wants to come on. But while we wait for any respondents or volunteers, I'll just ask another question here. What would you say is the tokenization of a project or an asset? What is the kryptonite for that? So, for example, they have here like tokenizing physical assets like real estate. What would, I guess, be the kryptonite? What would destroy that from being valuable, I suppose?
Okay. So off the top of my head, I could think of two things wrong with that. So when you tokenize, you have to make sure that the rules of like securitizing, tokenizing, that somehow what you're doing is you're taking a piece of property that people know it, and then you're actually creating fractional ownership. So you have to make sure that future legal objections, conflicts, ownership transfers, all those things that happen in the future will not be contested, right? We have laws to, our traditional law says, here's a thing, here's a violin, and you can sell this violin, and here are the laws that allow you to sell this violin or this piano or this piece of land. We don't really have, and to do it physically using lawyers and signatures. We don't have rules, laws for when you fractionalize that and when you could have, immediate transfer of value. And if you, God forbid, use cryptocurrencies for that, right? I think Vinod Shaw had a company doing something like this. So there's a lot of things that you're hoping that will go right, but that's a big if. Like, are these smart contracts going to work perfectly? Probably not, right? So that's number one, kryptonite. So just the fact that basically we don't have a legal framework, both for the fractionalization and for also the speed of transfer, and all including the currency of transfer. That's number one. What was I thinking? Number two. Number two is that is what I call illiquid market. These things necessarily don't actually because these assets are not easily, because we also don't have a nominal business framework for trading them. If you think about just land, buying and selling land, that there's a certain illiquidity to it. It's not like stocks. It's not like foreign exchange. And if you take like things like fractional ownership of Stradivarius, it's a very illiquid market. So from a market perspective, from an economics perspective, what you would say is that the bid ask is very wide. Sorry, I think my dog just got here. So the kryptonite might simply be there's not a market to buy and trade these tokenized assets. Right. At least in a transparent sort of legal way. I mean, and also complementary to that is that they would also be very open for manipulation.
Awesome. That's very very insightful there. The downsides or the potential hazards in tokenization. We had someone on the cast earlier that was talking about government contracting. Like they went to school for government contracting and how they're starting to tokenize and be able to put contracts directly on the blockchain that are legally binding and enforceable. And I know a couple projects that are wrapping real estate like in LLC so that like having fractional tokenization of that piece of real estate is going to be enforceable in the court of law. So I think incrementally we're taking steps towards this. So it's really very interesting, and hopefully we build this digital economy that we kind of envision.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
just said Alex actually said secondary market for P2B trades. Okay, that's actually another as well, which is the fact that again, one of my startups that I worked with, we were involved in this. I think when it gets to secondary markets, you also have a lot of like anti-money laundering and know your customers. Again, you also have legal frameworks that allow you to that actually keep it illiquid because they'll allow sort of market transfer of these assets. But a lot of legal frameworks, for instance, Canada, have a really tough time. I said in order to did allow secondary market, but there's a lot of legal obstacles for a secondary market for these tokenized assets.
Mm, very, very cool. I have a question personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved your litmus test of like transferring value, tracking value, and so I want to know your thoughts on how that plays into things that are very subjectively valuable. So like we've seen a huge influx of NFTs recently, the like digitizing and tokenizing pieces of art where the value it's very subjective. It's not easily determined. So how do you feel this is in terms of a usable use case for blockchain technology?
That's a good question. So I think the you, you can tokenize something, which is to make a digital representation of something. Um, Putting a value on it is you don't necessarily have to put a value on it. For instance, you can say here's a digital token for ownership of this piece of art, right? It's very delicate. It's in a temperature controlled room and we don't want to move it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a digital token of ownership so that you possess it. At no point in that do I need to put a value on that, right? We could argue with it, or maybe you're just you're related. I just transfer it to you. So what I'm saying is that I think the answer to that is that you can still tokenize, and you could still record, but you could do a lot. There are a lot of different characteristics of that, which doesn't without getting into the value of it. You're right. I mean, if you're talking about a piece of art, I mean, it could be valued very differently, right? But one of the things you could do with it is what they do in regular accounting, which is you could put it's called, I think, book to market. So you don't put a market value on it because you don't know. You could say okay, it's located here. This is the owner of it. This is the last purchase price of it, without ever having to put a market value. So, but then again, you can still use the blockchain for maintaining a ledger with respect to that piece of work.
Right. That's awesome, and I think that's something what like some of these newer platforms that are doing the transfer of these NFTs they just put like this is what it sold for last time. Who knows what it's worth now? Could be worth nothing. Could be worth 10 times as much. I think it's such a interesting concept NFTs are bringing up these days. Okay, another question from the audience. To do if counting on harnessing the network effect, okay, might need to hang on. Compelling revolutionary use case, UBI alternative. Um, yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I'll try and read it out. If
Sure.
counting on harnessing the network effect, or what's needed to harness the network effect, I think is what they're asking. And are there any compelling or revolutionary use cases? They mentioned UBI alternative or modern Marxist manifesto. I'm not sure
I
what.
don't get it. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So Jed, if you want to maybe make an edit to that question, or perhaps you can come on the stream and ask it using your voice, it might help us understand what your question means there. Um, Here's another question. Professor Kim, what can the regulators do better to not scare the entrepreneurs away, but foster innovation in the space in terms of legislation around crypto?
Oh, that's a really, regulators have a tough job. I think if I were a regulator, and I'm not, and forgive me if this is again, I'm spitballing here. I think I would ask them to sort of I would ask them to say, if you're tokenizing the cryptocurrency, what is the expected true inherent value of it? Rationalize that for me. Like, forget how much, forget what's the greater fool. Forget what someone is willing to pay for it right now, right? Because the people that are evaluating cryptos aren't necessarily using sort of, the standard metrics that people who evaluate stocks do, not doing like, multiples and things like that. So rationalize for me, what do you think is true expected value in the long run of your token, right? And if you could do that for me, then we will work together and create an appropriate regulatory framework. But if you cannot rationalize that for me, if you want to do this simply because you think there's a market for this and there's a great fool out there that will pay for that token that you're creating, then that's not good enough, because that's leads to some exploitation down the road. But if you can convince me that whatever you're doing, your cryptocurrency legitimately creates economic value in the long run, and that token will be worth whatever you want to sell it for, then let's talk. Sorry.
No, that's
if
awesome.
I said something really bad to a regulator, I'm sorry, but that's what I would say sort of off the top of my head.
No, I mean, and at the risk of offending them further, like they do have a tough job, but in regulators and the space of lobbying, the incumbents, the traditional structures, what if the use case, essentially the value proposition for the token, is to disintermediate, like you kind of presented in your slides. The incumbents, they would want to lobby against that. So the regulators put in an even tougher position. Do I protect the value prop of the incumbent, or do I see the value proposition for the end user in perhaps lower costs or less friction kind of involved?
I think getting to that again, that's a really good point, because I think there are many instances where there's value to be provided in disintermediating, right? There's no doubt about that. The doubt is that, why do you need to disintermediate and have people pay for this new disintermediated service in a currency other than the current fiat? Why do I need to use Henry tokens to do this? Right? Why does it absolutely have to be Henry tokens? And the argument would be, well, if you do Henry tokens, then it makes me, as the minter of these tokens and the creator, like, I get my value from doing that. Right? I understand that from your perspective. Then my sense is that unless you reach network effects, unless all these things come to fruition, that token that I've just purchased may not be worth what I paid for it. Right. So why? So that's actually what I mean. I think, and that actually goes back to the whole point, is that because previously the intermediary made money sitting in the middle, right? So they just extracted a commission off of that. You're saying, well, this is going to be commission free, so I'm going to provide the service without an intermediary. Well, I got to get my 2 cents too. And they're saying, well, my 2 cents come from minting this new coin and having people pay for it. And that's what I think is difficult, is that I understand why you want to get paid, and I understand why you want to get paid in coins. I just don't understand why I would need to purchase those coins, right? And that that's actually a really fundamental issue with blockchain. Is it goes back to what lots of people, they think about it. Did Tim Berners-Lee make a huge shitload of money? No. Did Linus Torvald make tons of money? No. Right? And so that's the difficulty. I think someone asked about token economics. I think that's the difficulty, is that it's a noble pursuit and it's a worthwhile pursuit. I just don't know how much money it is in sort of being purist about that pursuit. I think there are sort of margins. I think there, for instance, you say, go like you do a triple blind. You go, okay, I'll provide this infrastructure. You will pay me, and you could securitize that, right? You could have people you could securitize it, so, which I guess is maybe token, but you could securitize it and you can get payment. Like, you could do this without tokenization, number one, or you could do this by providing a service which limits. So you could be the infrastructure provider, provide this disintermediation service, and promise not to use the data, and provide some sort of a model that actually where you are like an intermediary light, right? So combination of the fact that you extract some commission and that you securitize services for the future. There are ways to make money. It's just that I guess it's not going to be the home run that tokenization and doing an ICO would make.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to like what your goals are in terms of like, do you want to be the only one like super mega rich person, or are you looking to provide value for a great majority of people and you're okay being on an equal level with them? I think that plays a huge piece into this as well.
Yeah, I guess I mean, if as a purist should say, if you get to be like Linus Torvald or Tim Berners-Lee, you've achieved something in life that billionaires have. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how like ethics and motivations get mixed up in the economics and how we build these systems moving forward. Super.
I mean, I guess one of the things I could also tell you is that I've worked with companies that have had really good, legitimate business models, like legitimate uses. And at the end of the day, what made the most case for it is just to getting paid like a regular service provider and getting a fee for building that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I think you've got this wonderful tool which is token economics, and you could add layers upon layers. But at the end of the day, it's sometimes just I'll build it for you for a fee is often the best thing.
Yeah,
It's straightforward. Yeah.
yeah. On the note of like very useful applications of blockchain, what kind of blockchain in the current industry do you see as very promising?
That's a very good question. I see. I'm working with a shout out to Grain Discovery. So one of my research, and I think this, Grain Discovery is trying to do this. One of my research ideas is, remember I talked about tracking. So two use cases: tracking value and recording value. And I think you could mix the two. So the thing that I wrote a paper about this, and one of the things we said is, permit me to be a bit of an egghead here, but in economics, there's these two theories. One's so information asymmetry and adverse selection. And what they're both the reasons for why people don't do things. And one of the things that people don't want to get involved in a trade is what's called information asymmetry. Hey, you know more about something than I do, so I don't want to do a transaction with you because you rip me off. That's called information. So if you're buying something, you think, okay, you know more about it than I am, so I'm not going to buy it, right? Because maybe you're selling me something that's fishy. That's information asymmetry. And adverse selection says that if I make something, I have, like, if I make a bad choice, then I have to pay for it down the road. Like, if I buy a worthless piece of stock and it goes to zero tomorrow, then I've got to pay for it. So you don't do it because you're worried about making a bad selection. And one of the points that I argued in the paper is that if you have a blockchain market, right? So you buy something using a blockchain service, and that extends to sort of where it comes from. So let's say what Grain Discovery is doing, the vision is, let's say, grain. So you have a blockchain that says, that you could use the blockchain to assess the quality of grains from the farms, right? And the quality of the grains is part of the blockchain. It's immutable, it's verifiable, and that's used to justify the purchase, right? So what that means is that you don't have as much information asymmetry because, hey, I know where the grain came from, and there's this sort of reputable blockchain that tells me where the grain came from and the quality of the grain. So there's no information asymmetry. And as far as adverse selection, you could say, well, you know what though, I'll buy, because it's on the blockchain, because we could trace it, I can do things like, I'm not going to buy 1,000 barrels of it now. I'll buy 500, I'll buy 200, and then I'll see how it goes. And then later on, maybe I'll get some more but you could have a smart contract that keeps track of that. Or if I bought 200, and it was sort of a low quality, then there might be a kickback contract. There might be like a rebate that I get for the next 400. That's hard to do in real life, but if you have a smart contract that runs this, then this could actually work. I'm not actually saying that Grain Discovery does this, but the idea was that if you could tie in sort of the blockchain-based tracking system with the blockchain-based uh, trading system, then you could sort of mitigate the reasons why people often don't trade, which is information asymmetry and adverse selection. I can.
That
Anyone's interested, I'll send you the quick paper that I wrote.
Yeah, please do if you have the link handy. If not, we'll make sure, like, just send it over and we'll make sure it gets into our Discord so that people have it. But I think that was an amazing suggestion for people that are looking to build, like, still deciding on what they're going to build for the hackathon, finding a middle ground to satisfy those two things. And of course, supply chain is a huge piece that blockchain has immense benefit to use for.
You know what? I have a really good caveat to that, because one of the other companies I advised early on, like in 2017, were really in STOs. We were interested in doing STOs. We'd actually had, we were talking to the regulators. We even had someone that actually wanted to, securitize their future assets. It was a legitimate company. So we had everything in place, legitimate technology. We had regulators involved. We had someone that was legitimately wanting to do a security token offering. And we had someone who was potentially a buyer. You know why it didn't work? It didn't work for very clear reasons, because the STO provider, so the company that was going to securitize their asset, said, "This is a new technology. I want you to pay more money for this because we're using this new technology because it's risky." And the buyer of the STO said, "This is new technology. I want a lower price for that." So what happened was the bid ask was so wide, no one wanted to do it. And it was simply because this was new, technology. And that's the thing, if you're an entrepreneur out there, that's what you're going to have to battle with. On top of everything else, what many people think it's suspect because of, cryptocurrencies, all these other things that I talked about, you also will have to contend with the fact that this is new technology that actually makes some people's heads spin in the first place.
Very, very interesting. This has been such a great chat. I think we're going to start to tie it up here, but I want to touch on a little bit of what you just mentioned, like the uphill kind of battle for us in an emerging market. I'm curious on two sides of this coin, because I know you've had your hand in both sides, in the education sector and in the government sector. So what has been the uptake in your perspective from our large universities or educational institutions on providing education on blockchain and their adoption of it? And then on the flip side, how has it been dealing with governments in terms of the adoption of blockchain?
Okay, so education, I think, George Brown has a really good, it's in Toronto. Forgive me if I'm sort of speaking in the local context, and hopefully it projects to, if you're from other places, it projects. But what I know is that in Toronto, we've got a really great program at George Brown. Are you involved in the George Brown program?
I'm not from George Brown, but okay. We've had a hackathon at George Brown before.
Yeah. So they're great. I think the George Brown program is really good. And we've just kicked off. We were going to have a regular class, but all this COVID stuff happened. But we just kicked off through our continuing studies at York University, a blockchain program. And those are more technical programs. I'm about to teach a course on blockchain. So there's not that many in blockchain in Canada. There are some places in the States with blockchain education. And then there's also, like a lot of the things like Udemy and Tapscott have some. So there are bits and pieces. I think I think we're doing it the right way. I think people are doing it the right way. In my opinion, where a cogent program makes sense is at the technical level. So maybe I'll teach my MBAs and maybe I'll teach a course here or two. I'm not sure. I personally, I don't think we need 6 management courses on blockchain, but I do think we need 6 to 10 technical courses on blockchain, right? And then that sort of gets complemented with more management courses. But even for management stuff, I know Tapscott's Don and Alex have a thing with INSEAD, and I know that Oxford has these blockchain courses. So they're there. what would but I do think we need it, and I do think we need it because unfortunately there's a huge variety in terms of the quality of education, right? I taught a technical course with Merrick once, and we delivered it for like $100, really dirt cheap, because we could. Actually, interestingly, I think. We actually made what happened was that part of it was that we actually made this. We said, you're gonna do this, you gotta do legitimately, so you have to pay in ethers. But it was right around the time when it kind of doubled. So we didn't mean to, but we actually, or actually, I didn't make it for money, but we ended up making it more money because it doubled in the time that the course was being offered.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so
So that mean, so I'm sorry to put a bow on it. What I'm trying to say is that um, it is out there, and unfortunately, it's not a coaching program. But I do think if someone was really serious, again, it's big expense in terms of time, right? In this area, I really like the George Brown program. I really like the hopefully the York program. I think those are if you're gonna do it the right way, and you've got the time, and you've got and you got the willingness to do it, I think those are the best programs.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Professor Kim. I've been enlightened through this discussion. I've gotten notes here on what makes a viable blockchain business, and if it doesn't fit into these boxes, it's not worth our time, not worth our energy. I really appreciate you taking the time today, and yeah, thank you so much. We hope to have you for another talk, maybe in the future.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Take care. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, we're going to sign off for the evening, but we're going to be back in 2 more days for another batch of workshops and talks. So until then, I will see you in the Discord chat. If you have any questions, please meet us there. And until then, until the next workshop, I will see you guys later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.